I was always afraid of being Asian, and I wanted to be more white during that period of my life. Sometimes when we're fearful of a certain element about ourselves, they can actually become our superpower.
I didn't know anything. I didn't know anyone. I was different to everyone else, and I had to kind of do or die, essentially. You feel like you're going to let people down if you're not this persona, this pedestal that they've put you on because of, say, social media.
Everyone is born with two fears, and two fears only. Every single other fear that you have is learned behavior. What fears do you have that are not serving you?
I went to an Armenian school, so obviously everyone's like me.
What, big?
Big, jacked and shredded.
When everything was going well, when I had millions of followers, millions of views, the biggest thing I was fearful of was not being famous enough. Or you're irrelevant now, that means you're not a human being anymore, you're worthless. Well, we are live on our something episode of the podcast. Good to be back, guys. My name is Jamie. Bailey and Chris are with us tonight, and we're in the beautiful Sydney Harbour, as always, as well. How are we today?
Bro, that was a beautiful introduction. Thank you
so much.
Wow.
That was very good.
Did you rehearse that?
I did actually.
Yeah, you've been singing that, practicing that in the shower?
It was in the bathroom just before.
Did you hear me?
Just talking to himself.
I knew you heard me. Something was sus about the night.
So you asked me how I am. So today has been a bit of a long day, but I'm very excited to be here. I think we've got a good topic to talk about today. Something that I guess, resonates with all of us and hopefully with our viewers who are watching. So you want to take us away, Bailey? What's our?
We're going to go into a bit more of a deeper topic. We want to, I guess, at the start go into more. So we're going to talk about different fears that we had and how they've evolved over time. So like, fears that you have more when you're a bit younger, fears that you have, as a man, teenager, into 20s, and yeah, just break them down and see if you guys relate. I'm sure there's going to be some interesting ones, some different ones, but yeah, we'll see how we go.
Well, Bailey, what's your biggest fear? That's what I want to know.
Oh, jumping straight into
what is your biggest fear in life that you have? Whether it's, we'll go current. What's your current biggest fear?
Yeah, I think there's probably like two topics, right? There's like fears of things you're actually scared of that actually get your heart racing. And I feel like there's more like deeper ones that like, whether it's like death or like not living up to your potential. But I think honestly, like straight to the chase, I think a lot of people relate to this. We were kind of discussing a bit before the episode, but my biggest one I think is not living up to your potential or your God-given purpose. I know that
that's a good one.
That's always been my biggest one. Like, more particularly in the last few years, but not that it's like an expectation, because I know we're all given our gifts and abilities to fulfill that standard, but I just would hate to, get to the end of my life and then reach a big man upstairs or see my potential of what I could have been and be nowhere near that. That absolutely terrifies me. So
that's a good one. What about you, Chris?
Yeah.
Well, funny you say that, because I can't remember who was telling me, but they were telling me about a quote where they go to a cemetery and then the old guy is pointing at the young boy. He's pointing at the tombstones, the young boy, and he goes, "This is where all dreams come to die," right? And he's like, he wanted to start his own business. He didn't ask his that girl out. He didn't do that, and that's the fear, that you don't accomplish what you wanted to do. You don't live up to your your potential. I think we all agree in that is a big one. I think at the top of the chart, I think that's one of the biggest fears I have. Yeah, to not live up to my potential, have some juice that I didn't squeeze out, and I try every day to make sure that I do live up to my potential. Obviously, we can always do more, but yeah, I think I agree with.
Is that a common one? I don't actually know. I haven't had this conversation with that many people. Is that something that everyone has, or is there people that aren't scared of I think they don't even think about that?
I think, again, I don't know what everyone thinks, but I think people who are on, I guess, this journey like us, who are in the locker room, people who want to better themselves, who have big aspirations, big goals, I think this would be something that they think about, because they hold themselves up to a standard. I think if you hold yourself up to a standard, then you always want more. And I guess you kind of feel like maybe I won't get there.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm very similar in that way. I think I kind of summarized both of what you guys said. I think my fear personally is like not living up to the calling that God has for me, which I guess relates to, fear of regret or fear of not being in maximizing my potential as a whole. I think, personally speaking, I've gone through a lot in my life where I know that, my purpose for God is pretty set in stone, which I know what I have to do. And I think my biggest fear is not achieving that, potentially becoming complacent or too comfortable potentially, or even just, as they say, lukewarm in some degree. I think fear as a whole, in terms of fear of the future and not living up to expectations, is pretty common for guys, not just our age, but also, early 20s or even in their teenage years and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Have you guys seen that thing where David Goggins, he actually talks about this and talks about how he sort of runs through this scenario in his head where he gets to the end of his life, goes to God, and he sort of reads out like these accomplishments for his life. And he sort of compares I've where he's this. He says it in pounds, but say 150 kilo man, pest control guy, didn't really, died at 55, heart disease, whatever, reads out the scenario and then compares it to his current situation where he's like, he's probably the hardest man on the planet. Like he says, has done everything. So he's like, hardest, like Navy SEAL, multi-million-dollar business owner, motivational speaker all around the world. And just drawing that comparison is crazy. So you can imagine like, say, Jamie or even Chris, you, for example, say he gets to the top and it's like, reads out all these things that you could have achieved, but you never got there.
It'll kill you, honestly.
Yeah, so that's...
But what do you think defines like achieving your potential and your purpose? Because for some of us, it's like we know exactly what it is that we have to go out and do.
I think personally, it's things that are maybe attainable, things that you've thought I can do this and you don't do. Start that business, ask that girl out, go for that solo trip around the world. Whatever it is, those things that like are doable, but you just never do. You either you're complacent, you're lazy, you're scared. Whatever it is, I think those for me are the things that like you can do it. It's right in front of you. Why didn't you do it?
Yeah.
Like, why don't you just take that leap? Go in the unknown. And if you back to what you said, Jamie, if you do have God on your side, then I guess He can kind of take some of that fear away of the unknown.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's interesting. Like, definitely as a starting point, ones that are in reach, but I also do know that like once you go for the ones that are in reach, as soon as you hit a certain level, which may be far beyond what you might have thought, the levels increase. So also you need to be casting the net super fast so that it gives you a vision and something to aspire towards and work towards, the point that it excites you to get up in the morning.
Scares you.
So it's kind of that balance. Like Chris is right on the money in terms of like have something that's attainable to get you going, but also have something not so far out of reach, because every time you take one step closer, it becomes more and more attainable and you keep pushing the bar, right? So I think that, you don't actually know what you're capable of until you try and go for something that's unattainable. And then what's that thing that Elon Musk says? Like, shoot for the moon, and least if you miss, you'll land among the stars. That kind of vibe that everyone kind of knows.
And I think what's like universally understood about, achieving your God-given purpose or your potential is the fact that I think for me, as an example, or many of us are scared that we sort of know what talents we've been given by God and we may not utilize them for the fullest of our potential because of things like distraction or complacency and laziness. Because in this day and age, in 2024, let's be honest, like there's so many reasons for you not to achieve your potential because there's so many things happening. For example, TikTok, you're scrolling. I many times of the day, I want to sort of study the Bible, for example, but then I get distracted by things like TikTok. So these little like microcosms of time wasters, whether they're a few seconds a day or a few hours a day, all add up to the grand scheme of things where, maybe one day you'll look back in your life and say, I wish I didn't get so distracted by things because my potential has come, at a
what other fears you got, Chris?
Well, I want to get into some of my other fears, but I was going to piggyback off what Jamie was saying. I think, to be honest, what a lot of the reasons why people do have these fears that we've discussed is the fear of failure. I think a lot of these things they don't want to start, they don't want to do, they don't want to do X, Y, Z is because they're worried they're going to fail. They're not going to get that job. They're going to get rejected by that girl. You know, they're not going to be who they want to be. And it's like, it's okay to fail. We've all, like every person has failed, and every successful person has failed. And anyone who's done anything worthwhile has at some point failed, you know, unless you're the 1% that's perfect.
I think that's very valid, because I think what you're sort of touching upon now is, are half your fears even realistic? Because back in the day, for example, you know, we all would have had fears, for example, talking to that, you know, pretty girl, or doing something that, you know, puts us outside our comfort zone. And yeah, I think I'd love to ask you, like Bailey, for example, what was your biggest fear that you used to have that's now unrealistic?
I think when I was younger, it was more superficial things like, I guess, you know, fear of not fitting in, being outcast, you know, not being good enough in, say, sporting teams. Even like, I guess when I was, you know, really, really young, you know, being alone, just like quite superficial things, which, as you said, Jamie, now that I'm older, I love being alone.
Yeah.
You know, I don't mind if I don't get into a sporting team or something, because I know I'm enough. I'm happy with who I am and what I am. So I don't really get down. Sure, maybe it upset me, but I don't have that fear. So I think those are kind of things that I kind of have overcome.
I have a good story.
Tell me.
Oh,
Here we go.
king of the stories. Let him run.
Is it PG?
It is PG, yes.
Oh,
So I think when we speak about fear, I want to sort of touch upon a story that was from when I was about 13 years old. So when I was in primary school, so primary school for you guys
He
watching.
remembers these stories, vividly, like detailed. It's so good.
when you listen, you feel like you're there.
Yeah,
Let's just all
just
teleport.
close my eyes. Yeah.
So yeah, when I was in primary school in Australia, or New South Wales at least, is from the ages of about 5 to 12. I went to a school in the North Shore of Sydney in Chatswood, and the school was predominantly Asian. So I'm half Asian, and I kind of always felt like I fit in, but I didn't. So being half Asian, I'm half Chinese, a quarter Hungarian for people's references out there. I always felt like, yeah, at that particular school, I did fit in, but I didn't. I almost wasn't Asian enough because I was at a school full of more Asian people. So I went to a Catholic boys' school in year 6, and that boys' school turned out to be the complete opposite of my primary school. So it was, I would say, 90%, you know, white. There was a select handful of Asians, like not Asians like Bailey, but white people like Bailey.
What?
And moving to that high school, I kind of felt like, oh, now I don't fit in again, because I think when you're half Asian like I am, or you're mixed, you never feel like you fit in anywhere.
So you needed to find a half Chinese Hungarian school.
Correct. Full of Eurasian students would have been ideal.
There's plenty of those around.
Exactly. So yeah, it was weird because I had the opposite effect at my new school. I felt like I needed to be more white. From about year 7 till about year 9, so 2 years, I remember just experiencing a lot of bullying. So I was sort of like, I was always afraid of being Asian, and I wanted to be more white during that period of my life. And this was happening for so long, as I said, for about 2 years, where it was just constant bullying. And I remember one moment that was the pivotal moment where you could say my entire life changed. I was eating recess with my Asian friends.
What were you eating?
An organic sandwich
rice.
with brown bread
Oh,
that my mum made me.
Okay.
Always organic. And I remember we're just sitting in a row, like next to the sort of like sports field. And it was me and then like another Asian friend, an Indian friend, another Asian friend. And I remember this kid probably like in year 10 or something comes up to us and he goes, "Oi boys, come over here, look at this. Asian, 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 Asian." And he counts us all out as being Asian. And for me, that was the exact tipping point where I said to myself, I never want to be associated with Asians ever again.
Really?
Oh, wow. And
So I left.
And you
big,
lived
man.
in the most Asian suburb in
Correct.
Sydney.
Exactly. So what I did was I left, and I left the Asian group and never went back. The following 5 to 6 years of my high schooling, I'm bad at maths, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Shouldn't you be good at maths?
I should, because I'm Asian. I didn't want to associate with any Asians. If there was Asians in my circle, then I would make sure that there was only like 1 or 2, not too many, because I didn't want to be bullied again. And I'll tell you how this relates to fear. I was afraid of being who I truly was. And from that fear, this carried over into, you know, basically all my high schooling, even leached into my university life and adult life as well. But the funniest thing, and this is why we're talking, and this relates to unrealistic fears, was that when I started moving into social media and I started making videos with my dad, I realized that actually me being Asian or having half Asian blood was one of my biggest, you could call it, weapons. one of my biggest strengths, because then I started to realize the dedication and the loyalty that my Asian audience had as opposed to the more white audience.
They resonated with you.
Correct. So sometimes when we're scared of something and we're, fearful of a certain element about ourselves, they can actually become our superpower.
Oh, I love that.
So it's like your biggest downfall, your biggest failure, you could call it, or your biggest insecurity can become your biggest weapon. And I remember, you hear people that use their differences or their difficult situations in life to make something out of themselves. You think of all the
started
speakers
as a
on
burden
stage.
to them at the start. Like they thought it was a burden anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Exactly. So that's an example of how I sort of used a fear that I used to have and really capitalize on it in a positive way in my adult life.
That's really valuable, I think, for a lot of people. I haven't, obviously, grown up in Australia, I didn't have that experience, but I'm sure there's plenty of people out there who, migrate to other cities and have that exact same experience. So yeah, there might be some valuable information there. Do you think fears, based on that story then, do you think a lot of the fears that we have are learnt, or they're sort of like innate, like for everyone? Because
What do you think, Chris?
they're that's potentially a learnt fear, right? Like bullying based on an experience that you had. It's almost like a traumatic response. I never want to have that happen again, so therefore I'm going to do this. It's like potentially a trauma response in a way.
Correct.
So,
I'm sure, Chris, you had a bit of this as well.
Yeah, well, I guess, I did have similar to you as well. I went to I went to from kindy to year 6. I went to an Armenian school, so obviously everyone's like me.
What, big?
Big jacked and shredded, the hottest bloke in the room 24/7.
No, they weren't. Unfortunately, they weren't all like that. But there were.
They weren't all as shredded as
I
me.
was the 1% in my minority.
No. So everyone was Armenian. We all spoke the same language. We all played sport together. Like all our parents were friends. Like it was very like, I knew everyone. I was very welcomed. It was like no stress, no worries, right? And then in year 7, I went to a complete Northern Beaches, blonde, blue eyes Australian school. Obviously, you can imagine. I was like one of 2 WOGs ethnics in the whole school.
Really?
And, like 1,000, I don't know how many students, but a lot of students.
What
right?
schools are you guys going to? I swear Sydney is like multicultural.
No, I went to
Well,
Chatswood Public
this is-
Primary, and then I went to
you've gotta
St. Pius.
You've got to remember, this is like 10 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah,
true.
long
true.
time.
It's
You've
become
got
a
an
lot
ancient,
more
you guys are.
multicultural.
15,
Yeah,
10,
we are
15, yeah.
So basically, yeah, it was obviously quite difficult initially because I was scared. I was like, how am I going to make friends? I'm different to everyone. At the same time, I was like, I'm still gonna, like, I was really good at soccer when I was young. I was like, I'm still gonna follow my soccer. I was scared I wasn't gonna get into the teams. I was bullied as well because I was different. I used to get called all these names. I used to be, I didn't want to go to school. I used to tell my mom, take me back to the Armenian school. Like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. And I guess for me, I kind of built thick skin. I honestly, I to this day, I tell everyone, like, I'm so happy I went to this school, because as much as I was scared and I didn't enjoy it initially, I learned so much. I got out of my bubble. I was stuck in a little Armenian bubble where it was comfortable. As you said, it was comfortable. I was put in an uncomfortable situation where I didn't know anything. I didn't know anyone. I was different to everyone else, and I had to kind of do or die essentially. And it took a while. It wasn't overnight, but I guess through the years, through sporting, through gym and everything else, I started to make friends. I started to be more welcome. But I learned so much from going to an Australian school that I never would have learned when I was in an Armenian school. I learned so much more about, because you're just stuck. It's like a safe. There's so much out there, and I had no idea. Now I have so many non-Armenian friends. I have so many groups of friends that are non-Armenian, and it's also helped me in my life. With networking, with business, with everything I do. It's been a blessing.
I have a question, and this might relate to you as well, Jamie. Do you guys think that high performance or excelling in sports in certain areas is a way of coping or fitting in to a degree where, like, not that you'll be put on a pedestal, but it's like, if I'm really, really good at soccer or something,
I think yes.
sort of puts you in a position where you feel like, all right, now I have credibility, status, then I'm going to be, because how like a lot of these big billionaires and stuff, and say like, a lot of their success comes because of their running away from, not fitting in. It's like, whether they were bullied or that's their way of like being valued. It's like if I'm good at something, then people are gonna like me.
100%.
Good question, and I know you're gonna say something, but I want to answer that. Yes and no, which is really interesting because with my sporting teams, when I was really good when I was young, yes, I would make friends. Everyone wanted to be friends with me because I was good. I used to go to everyone's houses. They'd come to mine. Like, not even as like everyone wanted to be friends.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because I was good, but for whatever reason in the school setting, because I was really good at sport, it was like a threat. They were seeing this outsider who's come in and is good at good at soccer, good at sports. He's gonna take our position. He's gonna take this and that.
Interesting.
And that actually was one of the reasons I did also get kind of marginalized and put to the side because they were like, who does this guy think he is? Kind of thing.
Interesting.
Which is really weird.
That's really interesting. Because, I think in that context, it really relates to other people. So, for example, if someone sees you good at something, then that has a direct tie to them. If they're trying to, say, for example, be a right midfielder and you are as well, then that creates a direct threat. I think for me, it was definitely mostly yes, because what I saw was, being in a high school where there were predominantly white people and I was sort of the minority. Even though I was just half Asian, I still was the sort of Asian minority. I felt that sport and also, I guess, my comedy sort of started to come out in that sort of era as well. I sort of
You became the funny guy, surely.
I actually did, yeah. And I almost used that, as you just said, Chris, or Bailey, whoever it was, as almost like a reason as to why I was good enough. Because I never felt good enough. I always felt inadequate because I was Asian. So I needed something to, I guess, show the rest of my peers that I was good enough. And I used comedy and sport for that. However, there was also a downside to it. Because when I was playing very high-level football, soccer, I remember I got into the leagues and I got into the teams and I was, a good player. But then from being at that high level of trying to prove myself and wanting to do it for the right reasons, which was, I love playing football and I want to be professional one day, but also being honest with myself and saying, hey, I'm also doing this so I can have some sort of status to prove to myself and others that I'm good enough.
And get chicks.
And get girls.
Side bonus.
Then had an opposite effect because when I got to that level, I was now scared to let other people down.
Yes, of course.
In football and in soccer and in sport, I know you can relate to this, Chris.
And that's in life in general.
Letting people down is a massive one. So when I was playing in those teams, I was like, cool, I'm the big man now. I'm finally worthy of something when I was in high school. But then I was like, oh no, if I screw up, then I'm going to directly affect all these people's days.
Your identity was set in your performance and not in
God, how it is right now.
Yeah.
And my identity in God right now is so much more solid than when it was in sport. And I remember, you'd be in like a football team, and I'm sure you can both relate to this. Mainly Chris.
You
didn't play football, did you?
No, I was
mostly
a solo sport guy.
Fair enough. So when you're in a team like football, you can be all buddy for weeks and weeks and weeks, but you make that one wrong pass back to the goalkeeper and they score, you're now everyone's enemy.
Everyone hates you.
And that was the biggest thing for me. So that was also somewhere where fear created something where I had to prove myself, but then turn back into another fear.
And that also ties into actually with your business as well. Your fear that you're not good enough, you're not funny enough. Like, for example, you with social media, for example, you create a persona, right? A lot of people, it's not so much an act, but you amplify your character.
Yeah, magnify it.
You magnify it, you amplify it. You act even funnier, you're a bit louder, this and that. And I know from Jamie and a little bit from me as well, but I used to see with Jamie, you're worried that people aren't going to think you're enough when they meet you. Are you good enough? Are you funny enough? You'd have to always, play a part. You'd always have to try to, it's like, I remember we'd go out and it was almost like people would poke Jamie, say something funny. Say something funny.
It became like a jukebox.
It's like a jukebox almost. And it's like every time he went out, he had to make sure he looks good. He's funny. His clothes are good enough. It's like always...
It's a lot of pressure.
You feel like you're going to let people down if you're not this persona, this pedestal that they've put you on, because of, say, social media. And I've kind of witnessed that as well. Now, for example, I guess this is a more superficial thing, but, I don't want to go to the shops if my hair's not done, for example.
Are you talking about now?
Now.
Yeah,
I'm talking about now.
Because Chris, just for you guys out there, he makes TikTok videos. How many followers do you have now? 700,000.
Bro, the guy's blown up. It's like
you're blown up.
700K.
You're blown up.
My hype crew.
Blown up. But no, I see it as,
mill soon.
just to give you a bit of credibility in in case all these people start commenting, oh yeah, like who do you think you are? Chris has been doing social media for a while, but recently in the last 2 years, you've really blown up on TikTok. You and your girlfriend make funny videos, and I've seen it myself. You know, you're on the street and people recognize you, and you know, obviously, you're experiencing sort of, you know, what I also experienced.
Well, yeah, like my girlfriend, you know, now, you know, doesn't want to leave the not doesn't want to leave the house, but she's always conscious her hair looks good, her makeup's good.
I get that.
I have to make sure I'm not wearing like slouchy clothes, my hair's done, I'm smiling, you know, like you don't want to be in the car picking your nose or something. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're scared like every time you go out now. And it's very different to when we were young. Our fears when we were young was so different. Like, you know, the most trivial little things, you know, you're scared to, you know, walk in the dark, you're scared of spiders, it's so different, so little things. Like, I'm sure you both have something that you remember from your childhood.
Yeah, so just answering the question, you know, how I was asking about, you know, whether fears are developed, is an interesting fact. I just plucked this out of my brain. Basically, we're actually only born with 2 fears. Okay. When we're born. Do you guys know that? Do you want to guess?
I'm going to guess it's related to survival.
Kind of. So everyone is born with 2 fears and 2 fears only. Every single other fear that you have is learnt behavior from experiences. So the first one is falling. Like babies, they've done scientific tests on this. When babies are born,
I've heard this.
Falling is one fear, and the second fear is loud noises.
Really?
They're the only 2 fears that you're born with. Every single other fear that you have today has been learnt behavior, learnt through experiences. And look, some fears we need to have. Like, you know, think about back to the tribal days. Someone tells you that crocodile can kill you. You kind of need to know that. So, you know, all right, I should be scared of this crocodile. That's kind of how we've evolved as a species, right?
Yeah, wow.
To learn what's going to kill you. So, you know, don't eat those poison berries. They'll kill you. Okay, now I have a fear of if I eat these poison berries, I'll die. That's how we've evolved. But it's just crazy to think out there that when you have certain fears, whether it's anxiety about the future or like certain scenarios, it's actually learnt, apart from the falling and the loud noises one, it's learnt through an experience or through someone's told you. So the question I have for you guys and everyone out there is, what fears do you have that are not serving you and that are a result of experiences that may not be truth or things that you're projecting in your mind? There's probably plenty of them out there. So
it's a good question. Yeah. I think, one of mine would have to relate to my line of work, which is obviously, you know, being in the public eye and for so many years being seen as like this guy that, as Chris said, always has to be funny or on all the time or sort of punchy. And I think, you know, even though I do different content now, it's not so much for the comedy, it's more documentary stuff and obviously the podcast, there's still an element of like that sort of like inadequacy almost. Because when I was at sort of like my peak, you could say, where, you know, I was known by the most people and my videos were saying going the most viral back in the 2017 to 2021 days.
Bro, you haven't hit your peak yet. What are you talking about?
I haven't exactly, but a different peak.
A snapshot of the peak, yeah.
Correct. One thing actually very surprising to some of you guys, or maybe all of you guys watching this, is that I actually, during that time, when everything was going well, when I had millions of followers, millions of views, money, you name it, the biggest thing I was fearful of was not being famous enough.
What?
Yeah. I can see that.
That's crazy.
And I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because that was your identity.
Correct. It's because back then I had no God. That's the first thing. So I didn't have an identity in anything. And so my identity became what people perceived me as.
So were you God to yourself in a way?
I wasn't God to myself, but I was almost trying to make myself a God because people were sort of almost literally treating me like that.
And would you compare yourself to other people and try to be better than them?
I was. So in my industry, in the social media industry, it's so much about fame and followers and views and likes and who's the most popular, who's the most relevant, or you're irrelevant now. That means you're not a human being anymore. You're worthless. And so I remember one specific time that this really triggered me. I'd been making videos for a while and I had been sort of used to the lifestyle of, you know, meeting a lot of people on the street, saying hi, taking photos. That just became my life after a while in that era. And I actually hadn't seen one of my close high school friends for about 4 years since I'd started making videos. And I remember this one comment he said literally changed my entire perception about myself for the worse. So we met up and it was in Parramatta. I remember the day like it was yesterday. He goes, "Hey man, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. Let's go get lunch." And I remember like walking to lunch with him. And this would have been like 100 meters down the road. Like we would have started at Parramatta Station and gone down to like the Meriton area, maybe 200 meters. And when we got to the restaurant, we sit down, we order, we get a glass of water. And he goes, hey, bro, I'm just wondering, like, why haven't you been recognized yet?
Oh my God.
And I was like, wait, what do you mean? Why haven't I been recognized? What's that supposed to mean? And he goes, oh, I just thought you would. Like, you're like a big, you're famous now.
It's like snarky comments.
yeah. And I'm like, it really made me fearful of not
Self-conscious
being
as well.
who people perceive me as. But now
That's
with my
crazy.
identity in God, that's all
Yeah.
different. I'm sure you experience this now to some degree, Chris.
Yeah, look, I have experienced that. However, the difference is, I don't really like. Again, I don't think I'm famous by any means, but I don't necessarily like. I love it when people come up to me. Don't get me wrong; it's so nice. People are so lovely. They, if I can make someone's day by saying hi or taking a photo is a blessing. But I'm not necessarily upset. Like sure, early on, like I'd have friends like joke around, like, oh, like, no one came up to you today, but it's like a friendly, like completely joking. Like it's not a snarky comment, like, hey, what about today? Like kind of thing. But I wouldn't mind because it's like for me, it wasn't like, oh my God, I had my identity with that. I didn't really have my identity with it. It was nice. But I do sometimes I'll go out and then I'll be like, oh, like, I'll be a little bit surprised if someone didn't come up to me. And I guess I know what you mean. If you're with with a new group, and I know if you're with a new group, and I know in the back of their heads they're like, oh, now he's got a little bit of clout, this and that. Are people going to come up to him? And if they don't, I know what you mean. You feel like, shit, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not as famous as people think I am. Like it'll kind of what's the word? It'll kind of validate the fact that I'm well known now. If someone comes up to me,
That's right.
it's like, oh, okay.
It's literally like
someone
that.
came up to me now. Okay, I am who I am. Say I am. It's all good.
Yeah.
But I have had times like that, but I try not to kind of play into that too much. I'm like, look, it's a blessing if it happens. It's not my identity. To be honest, it gets to a point where like sometimes you just want to spend time with your friends without being interrupted or by people watching you. Like and we've had this fear and I've seen you, and I never had the experience until recently of you go out and you have a fear of like everyone staring at you, and you kind of get anxiety. I've had it a few times where I've had anxiety because I've walked through, and it's usually like somewhere with a lot of young people, and I can see everyone's heads turn and they're looking at me. And if I'm with Hannah, I don't care.
It's different when you're with people versus by yourself.
A million people can look at me, and I've got my girlfriend in my arm, us versus the world. But if I'm by myself, like sometimes I'll walk somewhere. Is a lot less now, but early on when it first started happening and everyone's heads are turning or pointing or looking, you feel a bit uncomfortable. Like you feel scared, and then you're like, shit, like I'm just gonna look at the ground or look on my phone. And
That's crazy.
And it sounds so cringe, and it sounds like until you experience it, you can't understand it. And I would see it with Jamie, but I wouldn't understand it. Like I don't know if we've told you, but I remember early on before I had any clout, we were out somewhere, and like this is when Jamie was really popping, which he still is. But this is like when it was doing his funny stuff, and it was really peak, right?
Yeah.
And we went somewhere with a crowded young people, and he goes, "I need to go outside." I'm like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "I need to go out now." And we ran outside, and he's like breathing, and he's like, getting some fresh air. And I go, "You're right." He goes, "No, I can't go back in there." And we're at an event. He's like, "I can't go back in there." I go,
Really?
"Why?" I go, "Why?" He goes, I can't. Everyone's staring at me. I'm scared to go back in." And I didn't understand it. I'm like, "Bro, relax. Like, it's not that deep."
Yeah.
It's not.
That's what
But-
I'd probably say too.
Yeah, you would, right?
Yeah.
Any normal person would think you're overreacting. You're not. It's not that deep. No one cares about you. Like,
Yeah.
but when you
But
feel,
is
when
it
you
in your head? Sort of.
no, you see it. You see the eyes turn. You see it, and you just feel like small. You feel like everyone's judging me. I'm not good enough.
So what's the fear? You not being the way you're portrayed online. You not
Just
meeting
not-
expectations in your head. You not meeting their expectations.
It's a bunch
like
of
a
it,
bunch
yeah.
of things. It's like,
Just
am I
everything.
close?
Overthinking.
It's
Is it-
overwhelm as well. It can be
It's
overwhelming.
It's like overwhelming. Am I clothes good enough? Am I standing straight? Are they judging me? Do I have food on my do I look? I don't know. Do I look wrong? Is it? Are they laughing at me? Are they judging me? All these things, and you kind of get scared to go into like crowded places by
It's a lot of
yourself.
pressure. Even
And-
just living up to people's expectations.
It's a lot of
Crazy.
pressure, and to go off that, living up to people's expectations. Like, for example, letting your family down. You know, that's a big fear I have. Like, you know, coming from a ethnic family with, you know, I've been very fortunate to have, you know, always support and so much love.
And just for context, Chris's family is like the ideal family that everyone aspires to have.
Yeah.
Like I always say to Chris, like,
Yeah.
and his family, like they're obviously like
Very
my
blessed.
second family. Very blessed. I want to do exactly what you guys do for Christmas. I want to literally live like you guys.
Yeah,
You guys are
mad.
like my North Star of a family.
Yeah.
Just for context.
Yeah, and so like, you know, I've been very blessed to have a good family. You know, always, you know, been very comfortable with you know, with life, and so I always have a fear that I'm not going to live up to the expectations. You know, I've had all these blessings, and what if I don't do enough? What if I'm not as successful? You know, I don't make my dad proud. I don't make my mum proud. Like they're always proud of me, you know, but not enough. It's like I don't live up to my, and I always have that fear of like, you know, time's running out. Like not running out. I know we're not that old, but time doesn't stop. You know, every day that you feel like, why didn't I do more that day? You know, why did I take that lazy day? Or why didn't I work more or train more or do this or you know, work on my future? And I guess I have that fear of like, shit, time's running out. I have to do something with my life. Like I kind of get that fear sometimes. And I don't know if you guys have had that as well.
That also, just thinking about it, like just as we're talking, I think that also comes from knowing that you are capable and
Correct.
not reaching it.
Correct.
Because I don't think if you genuinely think in your head that you're not capable of much, like not reaching it probably isn't that much of a fear because there's not like you're not
100%.
missing out on much. But the fact, and everyone listening, like the fact that somewhat rattles you a little bit to think that like, oh, I might not meet that expectation, is that deep down you know
100%.
how far you can go. And that's what causes the anxiety. It's like, I know I can go reach my dreams, reach these certain heights. But the scary part is that I don't know if I'm going to do it.
Yeah, you've got all that ammunition.
Just talking about, I think that's where it comes from.
100%.
And I think if you're watching the locker room in the first place, you know that you have some innate purpose or you have some drive to achieve a potential that you know that you have, where
Better
others
yourself.
don't.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be listening to this otherwise, you know, because obviously us three boys are very much like that. We know we have a big purpose in this world. And we're not to say that people that, you know, don't have as big as a purpose are less valuable or unequal. Of course they are, but
Everyone's
more so
is equal. Yeah.
Exactly, but
And
more
everyone
so
has a purpose.
that's right. And whether the purpose is, you know, I always say this to people. I say, why do you think someone's purpose, you know, might not be as great as someone else's? I think everyone still has a purpose because if you think about it, like as simple as looking at someone who is, for example, a garbage collector. The garbage collector still has a purpose to then, you know, improve society or in some way, shape or form. Regardless if they're that career or, you know, like a movie star. Everyone has some sort of purpose because the world has to go around. We need certain people for different tasks. And I think whatever it is that people watching this aspire to be, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're, you know, being true to yourself, being true to God, being true to God's calling in your life. That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think people, you got to be careful with that as well, though, like because I think people sometimes assume greatness with eyeballs and views and like
Or money.
It's like,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
if you're, you know, the top of the pecking order,
Correct.
you're the you know, preacher in front with the church with 50,000 people. You're the guy
Exactly.
on the stage, the motivational speaker with 100,000 people. I think a lot of people can see that and go, oh, his purpose must be greater. But at the end of the day, everyone's is equal and serves in different purposes
100%.
in different ways. And I think it's hard because people do trying to, it's easy to ascribe like value to based on numbers. But I think one thing that we're all trying to do here as well is like find the difference between like influence and impact, right? It's one thing to influence people. I think influence is measured by like volume.
Correct.
You know, how big is your influence? Oh, I reached 1 million people. But something we're trying to do here, and I think everyone should be aware of, is like, don't go for influence, go for impact. And so it's like influence versus impact. Influence is volume and impact is value. So
That's awesome.
I think, yeah, like, and then this is what I'm sort of more going for, and I think this is something we're all pretty aligned with in the locker room. We'd much rather have like a small audience of people that are like really going for it, leveling up, and really like pushing out a positive message and seeing people's lives transform, building community and building people into this movement and getting people a part of things of a much smaller scale, and know that we're seeing people impacted, connected. And I find that so much more valuable than like the huge scale volume kind of thing. So yeah, it's just something like that I think people can be aware of. Like look to impact people's lives. People should come into contact with you and be like, hang on a second, there's something a bit different about that guy. After I want people to say like, oh, after I met, you know, Bailey or Jamie or Chris, like I feel energized. I feel a bit better about myself. Oh, they complimented me about this. And when someone comes into contact with you, are they impacted? Do they change a bit of a perspective on the way they see the world? You know, the topics that we're talking about are kind of a bit edgy or like some things that not everyone's considering, right? So if you can be one of those people that's like, yeah, like when someone talks to you, they question something about what they're doing. Oh, whether you call someone out or you force them to level up just by your aura, your energy, and the way you sort of interact with them. I find that, you know, way more fulfilling.
Couldn't agree more. Like, and Jamie gave the garbage collector and the movie star. Like, what if the garbage collector, you know, in his spare time goes and helps homeless people, or underprivileged kids, or just goes around and compliments 100 people a day to make them happier, or whatever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be a career-driven money thing. It can simply be just, you know, your purpose can be just to make people happy, to make a change in the environment, to do whatever it is. Like, it doesn't have to be a views, a cloud, a money thing. And I think today's generation is unfortunately, a little bit corrupted in the sense that they do only value certain things. So I guess we're trying to change it.
It's a natural like instinct in a way. Like everyone kind of we're wired to like want status and these kind of things. But it's just
isn't bad. Isn't bad either. It's just knowing that, you know, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, it's not the be all end all. Yeah.
I mean, look at the world around us. Like everything's measured by, for example, with men, as I always like to preach, it's measured. If you're a successful man, you have to, you know, earn X amount of $1 million per year. You have to have the car, the house, you know, in this day and age, you know, of degeneracy, if you want to call it that. the successful man also has an array of different women that he sleeps with all the time, or sexual access.
Or one really good girl.
Yeah, I mean, true. But what's promoted within society is also
correct
promiscuity. And I think a large degree of fear within especially the youth, especially Gen Z, I see this with, is that they feel like they are promoted by a figure that's in the public eye, like Dan Bilzerian, that's promoted as the ultimate alpha, and they know they can't live up to that expectation ever. So then that stops them from actually trying things out, and also thinking that whatever the path they have is worthy.
He's Armenian, so just
okay. So maybe he's the
take it easy,
of,
right? Just take it easy, guys.
Yeah,
I got to back up my people.
But I think what I see with the youth is like, just because you may not have, for example, a body like Chris, just if you know,
would be nice,
would be nice.
It would be so good.
That doesn't mean you're not destined for something purposeful. But I think what I see is that men, especially in this day and age, being the, you know, natural provider and protector of the family unit, think to themselves, oh, well, I don't have this, so therefore I'm not worthy enough and I may as well not try. I may as well just distract myself with TikTok and other things because I'm not going to amount to, you know, what these figures in the public eye do. And Bailey, you said it yourself. I think success in this day and age is materialistically found with numbers and status. And that shouldn't be the case, because as mundane as some people's jobs are, they still have a purpose. So what would you say to people that sort of, you know, are growing up maybe in their teens or their early 20s that, you know, are too scared to do something because they see people in the public eye that are doing these amazing things, and they're like, well, why should I even try?
Yeah. So you touched on a really great point there, and I think it's crucial that we cover. What you got to take into consideration, which I sort of struggled with, or really, I guess, rattled me in like teens and early 20s, is like your teens and your 20s are your pre-season, your pre-game in the game of life, right? Locker room, game of life.
You love saying that.
I love it. So I think where a lot of the pressure comes from, and I'm very personally guilty of this, so I'm speaking to myself here just as much, is that where you're like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old guy comparing yourself to a 35, 40-year-old billionaire that has gone through so many more reps, so many more diverse life experiences, and you've put them on a pedestal and you're like, how am I ever going to reach that? And I'm guilty of this because like at 18, 19, 20, unless you're like, you know, a tech billionaire or like a crypto genius, you got to do so many reps that compound before you actually get anywhere.
And they were there. That person
exactly
on the pedestal was the little boy looking up and saying, maybe I'm not good enough.
They were the nobody. They
if
were
not
the,
worse.
They
if
were
not
the
worse.
person, looking at other people who are older. So I think something that everyone listening has to be aware of, and like really rationalize with is like you're putting these people on a pedestal who are so much further down the game. Like, to be honest, and a lot of people say this, you know, it's a pretty common trend right now, is like your teens and your 20s are pretty much preseason. Not until you get to your 30s, it's like game time. So in your 20s,
I'm a game time right now.
Yeah, you're in game time. So what I'm personally trying to do more of is like get as much life experience as possible, do the reps, try new things. That's why I'm trying all these different things, jumping out, trying a podcast, try and start a business that's like really out of your depth. Fail 100 times, like we were talking about before. Don't be scared of it.
Don't be scared to fail.
Muck up relationships, muck up career paths, muck up jobs, and that's what builds you the reps. And all those guys that you look up to have done this. So like,
exactly. I don't know what country that the people are listening to are from, but when you're in your 20s, you literally have nothing to lose. Like you have
100%.
nothing to lose because, okay, for example, if you live in a country, say for example Australia, I know that many listeners out there will be living in different countries, but the same applies. If you are in your 20s and you say want to go for a big business idea, you want to, you know, let's say do e-commerce, and your parents say, oh, don't do that, go to uni instead. You're literally taking more of a risk by going to uni than doing the e-commerce, because you can always go back to uni. But you can't, you know, do some things that you can while you're in your 20s because there's too much risk when you get older. You might have a family, you might have kids. And in a country like Australia, for example, people are always so consumed by the idea of like, oh, if I fail, my life's over. And what failure actually indicates to the human subconscious is death. Because when you think of something going wrong or failure, you think, oh, that equates to me dying, whether true or not. But for example, in this country,
HSC, for example.
exactly. It's not the end of the world, because if you say get to the lowest of the lows in a country like this, or a decent country, or literally anywhere in the world, there's some level of backbone that you have. You must have at least one friend, right, that will give you a few clothes if you run out of clothes. Because as human beings, we need shelter, food, water,
Or a bed.
and if you don't,
Yeah.
we will give you.
If you don't, we will.
Yeah.
or say you get to like $0. You know, in a country like this, you have Centrelink. Obviously, wouldn't recommend it, but if you have to, you have that backbone.
Yeah.
You know, the majority of us might have family that we can go to. You know, housing, we can go back live with our parents or relatives. Food, you know, there's a lot of food resources for people that are homeless. Like, you're not going to die, is what I'm trying to say. If you take a risk in your 20s, failure does not mean death. Failure simply just means you're back at square one, but you still 99% of the time have a backbone to not die. So
and you learn the lessons, and you have the skills. And
exactly. So just try the thing that you want to try. Who cares what other people say? You know, I've built a career out of social media and making videos. If I listen to all the people back in, you know, my early 20s saying don't do this, I would probably be doing something I don't want to do at 30 years old.
Yeah. Well, I resonate with that. Sorry, Chris, just last thing, then you go. I was just going to say I resonate with that a lot. Even with this podcast, I was like, you know, in your head, you're a bit scared. You know, I've never really done anything like this before. I've never done like this social media stuff. You guys are kind of more, you know, versed in it. I'm sort of like, you know, having doubts, anxiety, like, am I going to be able to speak? Am I going to be able to am I going to make a fool of myself? And you know, podcast, you know, maybe a little bit saturated these days. Like, you're coming up with all these sort of excuses to try and, you know, not do it, right? But then I was like, why not? Like, it's, you just got to jump in the deep end and try. And worst comes to worst, you learn a few skills, you try something new, you learn to speak a bit better. And I remember we were talking about this, and I was sort of saying, oh, like, how are we going to stand out? When we were first talking about doing the podcast, I was like, you know, how are we going to stand out? It's kind of saturated. Like, you know, what do people judge us? And Chris said the most simple sentence ever. And I remember this very clearly, and it stuck with me. He just goes,
He's good at those sentences.
Yeah. He just goes, yeah, it's not cool until it is. Like, you know, it just takes time. And then one day a switch will flip. And I was like, bro, this guy's a genius. It was such a simple sentence, but having the people around me to be like, nah, let's do it. Let's have the energy. And he was just like, no, like maybe it will be a bit cringe at the start, like when you're starting, but like all of a sudden one day it'll happen, like an episode might pop off, and all of a sudden it's not.
We'll
and we'll be like, oh,
Our first
now-
episode
now-
was definitely cringe.
and now you're comfortable. Yeah, 100%. We probably still are, but that really stuck with me because I was like, oh, it's such a simple sentence, but helped me get over the hurdle. So having people around you that also like want to push you is good as well.
And just on the topic of, you know, your teens and your pre-game, obviously, you know, a common theme we've all talked about is don't be scared to fail, right? Fail. However, I want to add to that. I just want to encourage to actually learn from your failures, learn from your mistakes. They're very good lessons.
Such a good point. Bro.
And so that's I guess one of the main things I wanted to add. You have time, especially if you're 18 to 25 to 30. You can. There's a quote that you can get to 30 and be absolutely broke and fail, and after 30 you can still become a multimillionaire, and nowadays a billionaire, because there's so much opportunity out there.
I think that's a good little topic to sort of touch upon. I think one thing that I see a lot of the time is people thinking that you have this sort of age that defines whether you're successful or not. So, I think in society today, it's like you have to be successful by your mid-20s, let's say, because you see all these people on social media or online that have achieved amazing things by the time they're 25. But the measurement of success in itself is definitely subjective. So I think people have to realize, and this is what Gary Vee actually preaches a lot. I'm not a fan of all this stuff, but some of his stuff. He's a big fan of, you're young even when you're 70, which is kind of, subjective as well. But I think that so many people, they go through their 20s trying things, failing, and they get to their 30s, which is, by the way, where I'm at. I'm 30 years old now. And they think when they're 30, your life is over if you haven't achieved anything. But that is completely false. I think the fear of turning 30, which is, I think, what we, to some degree,
is that
all
a fear
have.
you've got?
I don't anymore.
Okay.
But I definitely used to have this fear. Because 30 is a number, 3, it's like, wow, like almost like a third of my life is gone. And by this point, I should have, a wife. I should have, say, for example, a girlfriend, or I should be looking at marriage or have a mortgage or whatever these things are, or be successful. And if I don't, then who am I, essentially?
Yeah.
You see a lot
Societal
of guys...
expectations,
Yeah, you see a lot of guys go off the rails because they think to themselves they're just a massive flop because they've turned 30 and they haven't achieved too much. But they couldn't be further from the truth.
And 10 years ago, 30 was old, though. Like, 30 isn't seen as old now. Like, 30 is now like 40. Like, I used to think like 50 was like very old. Like now it's not that, I think times have changed.
Time creeps up on you as well.
It does.
You're going to be 30 before you know it, like me.
Oh,
I don't look 30, I know,
Hopefully
because
not.
I'm Asian, but that's one good thing about being Asian.
Hopefully got a long way
amongst
to
a
go.
lot.
And now I just wanted to talk about one of the most, I guess, useful ways that I've dealt with a lot of my fears from when I was young till now was, having a relationship with God and putting my fears into God, and knowing that God's there for me almost gives me a sort of, I guess makes me more confident, but also makes me like, I'm going to be okay. It gives me this just shelter that I know I'm going to be fine, and nothing that's going to happen is going to be happening without without God allowing it to be.
So that's good, man.
That's right.
Whatever happens, God is allowing it to happen, and it's going to be okay.
Yep.
Definitely.
No, that's an awesome one. I just adding into that, how you're saying, like, praying and sort of handing it over to God really helps with like the anxiety or like having that burden. And did you guys see what like George Janko, he put out a video, and I saw it was like so interesting. I don't want to take credit for it, but he was saying how the brain surgeons or neuroscientists have done studies that you can't actually, like, the part of your brain that processes anxiety is the same part that processes gratitude, and you can't actually have one operating without the other. Like, I saw that and I was like, that is a game changer. So if you have, what prayer does is essentially like you're trying to cast your burden onto God and just show gratitude. So if you a bit anxious and you say, start praying and say, I'm thankful for all these things I have. Thank you for my family. Thank you for the people around me. Your brain can't actually process anxiety when it has gratitude.
Wow.
Yeah.
Operating. So it's almost like the cheat code. And there's like, I don't know the exact ones that's annoying me, but there's verses in the Bible that talk about, casting your burdens. Like, all those things are there for a reason. They actually help us. Like, the way that the mind was designed, that if you think you are show gratitude in the moment, you can't be anxious.
Yeah.
And that's why, we obviously have God and things. That's why a lot of people are leaning in towards like the yoga and the meditation side of things, is because it actually works. Like, that's 100%. It's the way that God's designed our brain, that I just found that so fascinating. And it's a tip. So like, if people have that anxious tendencies, try the gratitude side of things.
Sorry, I love what you just said, and you've just reminded me of something that I was taught actually by my mum. And basically at a certain time in my life, I wasn't struggling for money, but I was a bit wary. I was like, oh, okay, I need to make, X amount of money. what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Like, I really need some options. I need some answers, right? And I was like, Mom, I'm praying to God. I'm asking Him to, give me these new opportunities, open these new doors. And I go, it's not happening. Like, why is it not happening? And my mum said something so important to me, and it was amazing what she said to me. She goes, when you ask God for something, okay, she goes, you're giving your burdens to Him. Stop worrying about it. She goes, you're asking Him to give you these, open doors and help you with your finances, but you're still worrying about your finances. Yeah. That's almost like you saying you don't trust God to take charge and to deliver in what you've asked Him.
Yeah, that's so she said, as soon as you have 1 foot in,
she said exactly. Yeah. She said, as soon as you ask God and you pray for it, let it go. If it's meant to be, God will take care of it in one way or another. Maybe not right now. And she said, it doesn't just work on your timing; it works on God's timing. And I think that's a big thing. Just to kind of leave it with God.
The Bible talks a lot about worry and casting your burdens onto God. I've just got a few verses here. In Matthew 11:28-30, it says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And then one more, which is a quick one, which is 1 Peter 5:7. Cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. It is true. And I think a lot of people out there that sort of don't believe in God potentially and don't have God in their life, like I personally never had until the last 2 years, it's kind of hard to understand how God can actually physically and, in all ways take away your burdens and carry them upon Himself instead of you having to carry them for yourself. And it's a weird kind of like unexplainable feeling when God does carry your burdens and you give all your worries to Him, because the truth of the matter is, like, it's hard to express in words how that feels, but it's almost like you have your Father, which is more or less true, the creator of the universe that is guiding you and wants the best for you. And that's not to say that you won't have problems or struggles in your life, because you definitely will, but that is also part of God's plan. But just knowing that God is with you in times of fear, in times of anxiety, in times of worry, which is what those Bible verses definitely relate to, gives you that sense of peace where no matter what is happening, and I can attest to this, no matter what's happening in my life, I just know that I'll be fine. And as long as I have accepted God into my life and Christ as my Savior, I know that I'll be guided on the right path, and I'm not living the path of the devil like I potentially used to be. And I think, a lot of people can't sort of understand this, and I encourage you guys out there that maybe don't have a relationship with God to consider it, because it's changed my life, it's changed all of our lives here, and without God in our lives, we wouldn't have half of what we have, and we're so grateful. I think another massive thing is also gratitude, as you said, because you're right. When you do, and I've actually tried this scientifically myself, when you have that sort of gratitude as an emotion, the anxiety and everything else becomes almost secondary, and you can't really feel it. And I think also when you pray, instead of always asking God for things, you should start off by being grateful for what you do have.
Correct.
And I think that that's one thing I've really seen. It's like I want something, but then I'm like, you know what? Like, God has gifted me and been so gracious to, bring me salvation in my own life, or bring me out of the gutter like I used to be in. 100%. And I just find, like, in the hardest of times, although things seem, chaotic and horrible, like, God is still with me and I can feel His presence even now, And this is the perfect time to thank God for this beautiful apartment that we're currently in. All thanks to our sponsors, Getaways. Sydney is a very big city, and you don't always get this view everywhere. This is the most iconic landmarks in the entire city, in the entire country, most likely. And shout out to Getaways. These guys have been amazing to us in terms of allowing us to use their facilities to do this podcast every single week. So if you guys do want to check them out, make sure to go to getaways.com.au or look in the link in the description below.
And that is the perfect note to end the episode. I've learned a lot in this episode, actually, from you guys, so it's been good.
Solve.
Yeah, and guys, please, whoever's watching, if you guys, have any questions for us, please ask us. Send us a DM or comment on the video, and we'll answer it in the next episode.
Yeah, I think we want to start answering some people's questions moving forward. That'd be nice. Yeah. So if any of you guys have any questions, burning questions, advice, tips, whatever you want from us, we're not perfect, obviously. That's
what I just said.
I just want to sound cooler than you, say more technically. And obviously, guys, you can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, Apple Music. We're even on Rumble now. All streaming platforms, Amazon Music. Yeah, TikTok. We also have a channel called Locker Room Chat Podcast Clips where we post the best parts of each episode. So check that out. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys soon.
Peace.